Hello, quilt artisans. My name is Shonda, and welcome to my channel, Under the Needle Quilting and Crafts. So today I want to talk about 5 things that I absolutely hate about quilting. I love quilting. I've been doing it for years. I taught myself years and years and years ago. I stopped for a long time because I was a working mother and I didn't have time. But as soon as my life settled down, I picked it right back up back in 2017. And in that time, I have found 5 things that I absolutely hate. Now, some of these things I hated from the beginning, but I did them anyway. And now I don't because things have progressed since then and minds have changed. And one of those things is pre-washing. I don't like pre-washing fabric. But the reason I don't like pre-washing the fabric is not the washing, it's the ironing. I don't like ironing yardage because we don't wash pre-cuts. If you got 10-inch squares or 2.5-inch strips, you can't I was going to say you can't put those in the washing machine, but I know there's going to be some random out there that's going to be like, I put my 10-inch squares in the laundry all the time. There's going to be somebody, I've seen it on Facebook groups before that, yeah, I wash my 2.5-inch strips. No, I'm not. I might put them suckers in the dryer. If I got 2.5-inch strips or a layer cake, I might put it in the dryer for lint purposes, but that's about it. But I hate ironing yardage. I hate ironing large pieces of fabric because they're just hard to manage, right? That's the real reason. They're just difficult to manage. And as much as quilting has tried to break me out of my perfectionist traits, I don't like it when I'm ironing and then I iron a section of fabric and then when I move to iron another section, then I get kind of wrinkles and creases in the part that I already ironed. Because if you're doing a large piece, at some point, you're going to have fabric on the floor, right? You're going to have fabric on the floor. You're going to have, fabric to the right of you, fabric to the left of you, fabric on the opposite side of the table or ironing board or whatever you're using. And I have a pretty large space here. Like if I want to, I can clear out this space and I have a spot that's about 2.5 feet by about 5 feet, right? So, conceivably I can iron a large piece of fabric, but I've got stuff up here. I've got knickknacks and notions and my computer. So even with my setup, I can comfortably iron half a yard without having to move a bunch of stuff around. So I don't mind that. Anything over that, maybe a yard, because if it's a yard, I can fold it in half, right? And then basically it's like I'm ironing 2 half yards, and then I can just go back and iron the crease. So it's not too bad if it's a yard. Once we start getting over a yard, I really hate it. Sometimes, of course, we have to do it for backgrounds. A lot of backgrounds have a high yardage count. You might need 5 yards of background or 3 yards of background. 2 or 3, I'll wrestle with it. I don't like it. I don't like it at all. But I'll wrestle with it. But if I see a pattern that calls for 5 yards of background, I'm likely not going to make that pattern unless I'm making a king size quilt. And that's why it needs that much background. Because if I'm making something twin size or less, which is primarily what I make, throw and twin between there, right? My quilts be 45 by 60 on the smaller side and like maybe 75 by 90 on the larger side of things. So if a quilt like that needs 5 yards of background, that's just a waste of fabric to me. So but yeah, so I hate ironing large pieces of fabric. I do not like ironing yardage at all. I don't, period. Second thing that I don't like, squaring up. I don't like squaring up. I don't like squaring up. I don't mind squaring up like the final block, right? So if I make, a block, that's supposed to be 12.5 inches or 15 inches, I don't mind squaring up that individual block. But squaring up block components like half square triangles and quarter square triangles and that type of deal, don't like it at all. I hate it. I hate it, which is why I have not made anything that has a bunch of half square triangles in quite some time, because I don't like squaring up. I'm one of those people, I have to stand when I'm cutting. I know there's some people that can cut while they sit. I can't. If I try to cut while I'm sitting, invariably my rotary cutter is going to veer off to the right. That's what happens to me when I try to do it. The only time I can reasonably cut straight is if this is my square, this top, like if it's laying flat on a table in front of me, I can conceivably cut this. But if I'm trying to cut this side, I just can't do it. It doesn't come out right. It's like I don't have enough pressure on the block, or I don't have enough pressure on the rotary cutter. I don't know, but it doesn't work for me. I have to stand up while I'm doing it. And then, after a while, my feet start hurting, my back starts hurting. It's just, I don't like it. I don't like it. I don't like it. And I need, not special tools, but if I've got a bunch of half square triangles to square up, I don't want to do that on one spot on my cutting mat, because I'm going to wear down that one spot. So I don't want to do that. So what I prefer to do is to take out a smaller mat. Of course, I don't have one over here right now. I'll take out something smaller that fits, or I might use my rotating mat and put that on top of my cutting mat. But I just don't like doing it. I don't. When I see a project and it's like the whole thing is half square triangles, I'm just tapping out. Unless they're like 8 inches or bigger. 8-inch half square triangles, I can handle that, but because there's not going to be that many of them. But a bunch of 2.5-inch half square triangles, no. I have no interest in doing that right now in my quilting life. Maybe one day in the future, but for now, absolutely not. Maybe when I'm retired and I don't have a job and I can just pretend that quilting is my job, maybe then I'll like squaring up a bunch of half square triangles. But for now, for me, absolutely not. I don't like it. I do it because I like the results, but I don't like the action of squaring up, and I don't like the time that it takes, and I don't like that I have to stand while I'm doing it. But cutting is really not my jam either. It didn't make my top 5, but I don't really enjoy cutting unless it's like easy cutting. Like that's why I like fat quarter friendly quilts and stuff like that, and just pre-cut quilts in general. I like, because a lot of them have consistent blocks, and so you're cutting everything the same, which makes it so much easier. But I've gotten used to cutting. It doesn't bother me as much as it used to, so therefore it didn't make the top 5. But in my beginning days, I really hated cutting fabric. But I think I hated the cutting because back then I used to pre-wash. And so by the time you've spent hours before you ever even get to sew anything. Like if you're pre-washing your fabric, right? And then you got to deal with the fraying, and then you have to iron that fabric. And then you have to, after you get it all ironed and pressed, finally you get to cut. And then once you do all that, then you finally get to sew. And so I think back then I hated cutting more because it was just one more thing I had to do before I got to sew. But now I don't have that pre-wash step, and I'm not ironing large pieces of yardage. It's kind of cut down on time for me. So I don't mind cutting anymore, but I used to hate it. Now just the squaring up, can't stand it. Third thing I hate, tiny pieces on big quilts. So if I am making a small quilt, a mini quilt, have you, like something, 20 by 30, or even smaller than that, 24-inch square, a mini, something mini. If I'm doing something like that and I have to cut a bunch of 2-inch squares, that just makes sense because I'm making something that's going to be like, the size of this piece of 8.5 by 11 or 18 by 20, something small. I don't mind. But one time I was on the internet, this was a few years ago, and I saw this pattern, And I was like, oh my gosh, I love this pattern. This looks so great. I don't remember what pattern it was, so don't ask me because I have no idea. I don't remember. But I don't remember what pattern it was. But I do remember I had to pay for it. I bought it. I bought it. And when I downloaded it and I read the instructions, it said cut like, I think it said cut like 425 2.5 inch squares. Absolutely not. When I tell you absolutely not, when I tell you I closed my computer screen so quick, I closed that document so fast, I said, ain't no way. There is absolutely no way I'm cutting that many 2.5 inch squares. Absolutely not. Because every one of those has to be sewn on. Absolutely not. So I have no interest in anything where I have to cut hundreds of a small piece of fabric. I'm out. I am out. Count me out. No, absolutely not. The fourth thing I hate, and this is going to sound weird, the 1/4 inch seam allowance. I hate it because I can't do it. That's why I hate it. I have tried everything to perfect my 1/4 inch seam allowance, except the one thing that might probably work, which would be slowing down. I'm sewing fast. I don't sew a lot, but when I'm sewing, I'm like making up for time. I'm like speed. It's but I can't get my 1/4 inch seam allowance, and I've tried everything, right? So I have done the trick where you get 3 2.5 inch squares, right? And you sew them together. And then you measure the middle square. And if it measures 2 inches exactly, then you know you've got your, you got your 1/4 inch, right? You got your 1/4 inch. But the thing is, I'll do that. And I'll press open my little test and I'll measure exactly 2 inches and I'm like, I'm good to go. And then I'll make my quilt and it's not right. It's always a little off. Everything I put together, even if I square, like if I have a block that has multiple components, even if I square up each component, my resulting block is always off by like 1/8 of an inch. So I just deal with it. At the end of the day, nobody can tell. I mean, if you can tell, then you're not my friend, right? You're not, if you can tell and you tell me, then not only are you not my friend, but you're not a real quilter either. If you look at my blocks and be like, Shonda, your block is 1/8 of an inch off here in the finished measurement, I will beat your ass. I'm sorry. I'm sorry. I don't mean that, but I'd be pretty upset if you tell me my block is off by 1 inch. I mean, 1/4 inch or 1/8 of an inch. I'm gonna be mad. I'm not gonna lie to you. I ain't gonna hold you. I'm gonna be upset. But yeah. And I've tried everything. So I have the foot with the little guide on it. I know sometimes that little guide can move and have some flex. So I've even done things where I've put something next to the guide to keep the guide from moving. But at the end of the day, we're talking about such a small, like 2 needles widths can throw off your quilt, right? It can not throw off your quilt, but throw off your 1/4 inch. So let's say I'm sewing, but I push the fabric into that guide a little too closely, right? And then the fabric starts to, bend a little bit, that's going to impact that 1/4 inch, even if it's just a little teeny tiny, right? So I don't worry about it anymore. At the end of the day, I like how my final quilts turn out. And that's the only thing that matters. The only thing that matters is the final quilt. So if I like that, then I'm good to go, right? I'm good. The fifth thing, and this is a combo, that would be borders, basting, and binding, the 3 Bs. Now, of the three, basting is definitely the thing I hate the most. Basting is what I hate the most about quilting, period. But we'll start with borders. I hate borders because I'm lazy. And once I've got the whole quilt top put together, the last thing I want to do is have to, because you're not supposed to cut your borders until you put your quilt top together. And then as someone like me whose quarter inch can be off, my finished top might not be the exact measurement that is in the pattern. It might be off a little bit because my quarter inch is off a little bit usually. So typically, to do your borders, you're supposed to measure in 3 different places. You're supposed to measure a couple inches in, like a few inches in on each side, and then down the middle. And then you're supposed to add those 3 measurements divided by 3 to get the average. And then you're supposed to cut your binding to that length. And then you're supposed to pin it on, easing in where you need to ease in. Because since you're taking an average, you're not just going by the edge. The edge might be slightly different than the border that you measured and cut for. So because of that, you might have to like ease stuff in a little bit, right? So I just don't like doing it. And then in order to do that requires me bringing the quilt, because I don't have a place down here where I can lay it out. Not really. So I have to take it to the living room. So I've got to take my quilt top to the living room, do the measurements, get the average, get my fabric, measure my fabric, cut. That's a pain. And then when you're sewing it on, I can't use clips. I have to use pins because the clips tend to come off. Probably because I got a little too much extra front here, so the quilt is rubbing against the front when I'm trying to quilt, and it makes the clips pop off. So I have to use pins, but still I've got the extra front. So the pins end up poking me in the thigh and poking me in the side and in the stomach as I'm trying to quilt, right? Or not quilt, but sew my borders on. Oh my goodness gracious. I hate it. But one thing that I have done that I did get from the late and beautiful Donna Jordan over at Jordan Fabrics was that the way she would do her binding, but she didn't take those 3 measurements, right? She would cut the binding, the length she wanted, and then she would lay the binding down the middle of the quilt and just snip it. Right? So, just for giggles, let's just say this is my quilt top here. Hold on. I got my notes here. So if this is my quilt top, right? And this is my binding. She would just lay the binding right there down the middle of the quilt. Okay. Cut it right there. Sew it on. And she would still do the pinning, and I still do the pinning. But that does, at least, so I'm not having to measure it 3 times and then getting the average. I can just, and what I do is I find the center of my quilt top, right? And then I find the center of my binding, my border strip. And I line those up and pin. And then I work from, and then I pin the 2 ends. And then I just kind of stretch the quilt or stretch the border and then pin down, if that makes sense to anyone. It makes it a little bit easier for me, but I still don't like, I don't like putting on borders because it's like I'm done with the quilt top and now I got to do something else. Basting. Now, I hate basting because my knees don't like it, right? That's 220 pounds on my knees. Like, that's a lot of weight. Now, my knees are fine if I'm up, walking around, moving, bending, flexing, squatting. Knees are fine. But to actually put the knees onto a hard surface, they don't like that. They don't like it. And so for me, basting inevitably requires me crawling around on my knees. And again, I have to take it to another space. So I've got to take my backing to another space, right? Tape it to the floor. Then I've got to go get my batting, bring that down, get my batting on, use my spray based. I've got to put like blankets and not blankets, but sheets and stuff on my furniture and on my floors to make sure I don't mess up my floors and my furniture because I spray based. So there's that. Get my batting down. Then I got to get my quilt top down, do the same thing, and all the smoothing and making sure it's even and smoothing and smoothing and smoothing and smoothing. I could make my life easier if I wasn't so cheap, but I tend to use the least amount of backing that I can, and I tend to use the least amount of batting that I can. So I don't have a bunch of overhang on my quilts, which might make basting easier. I don't know. Y'all let me know in the comments. Is it easier to baste if you have more overhang? I'm guessing it is because you don't have to be as precise. Like there have been times when I've gotten stuff lined up, but I had to switch because I didn't have enough batting behind showing out on the edges of my quilt top, or I didn't have enough backing, that type of thing. So I'm sure that makes it a little bit easier. I did create a wall so I could spray based on a wall, but then I use that same wall as my design wall, and I put a quilt up there like 2 years ago, and I've never put it together, so it's still up there. It's still up there on my design wall. So maybe I should make that one of my 2025 goals, or my age 49 goals that I was talking about. Maybe I should make that one of my goals, to just, even if it's just one seam a day, just one seam a day to help put that thing together. I think I'm going to add that to my my to-do list for my 49th year on this planet. But yeah, I do prefer to baste on a wall because then at least I'm not crawling around. And then you've got the natural gravity of the quilt holding it down. And then I can also use clips instead of using tape and things like that. So I need to clear my design wall off so that I can go back to basting on a wall. So I need to get to that. Binding. I used to hate the entire process of binding. I don't anymore. Now, the only thing I hate about binding is attaching the pieces. So what I mean is you create your binding strip. Fine, no problem with that. You put your binding on one side of your quilt. Fine, no problem with that. But then you have to attach the two sides so that you take two edges, right? And you put them right sides together and you sew on the diagonal to get this. I mess this up every single time. The only time I don't mess it up is if I have a time when I'm doing a lot of binding. Like I had one period where I bound like 4 placemats or something like that. So of course the first one I mess up, but then the second, third, and fourth one, I got it now. So I thought it would be super cute to do this for myself, right? And I made this little thing for myself so I'd know, okay, so this fabric is going this way and this fabric is going this way, and that's how you put them together and that's how you sew it. I got arrows on here to tell myself which way to put the stuff, and I would still mess it up. I'd still mess it up. So I hate binding because I hate joining the two sides. Other than that, I don't mind binding. I used to hate binding. Now I don't. I do need to learn to slow down though. I tend to like speed through it. So I tend to make mistakes. I think I just need to learn to slow down and enjoy that last little bit, right? Because finishing the binding, once you put it on one side and you've attached it, that last little trip around the quilt is only going to take about an hour. So I think I just need to learn to slow down and enjoy that time instead of barreling through it like I normally do. So, binding. Borders, basting, and binding. So to recap, iron and yardage, squaring up, tiny pieces on big quilts, the 1/4 inch seam allowance, and borders, basting, and binding, the 3 B's of quilting. Those are the 5 things that I hate about quilting. But I did think of a bonus 6th item, and that is other people. Specifically, other people that want to tell you what you should or should not do. Like the pre-washing folks. You have to pre-wash because one time in 1987, I did a red and white quilt and I put it in the wash and the red bled into the white and just ruined my quilt. Well, ma'am, it's been 40 years. Dyes have improved and we now have color catchers. I'm not pre-washing, period. The only way I would pre-wash is if someone commissioned me to make a quilt for them and were paying me top dollar. Then I would pre-wash everything and then starch it. Other than that, absolutely not. The people that say, oh, you have to get quilt shop quality fabric from your local quilt shop and you must buy local. Well, if I had to buy fabric from my local quilt shop and buy local, I never would have been able to start quilting because my first quilt came with fabric I found at Walmart. My first machine came from Walmart. So if I gotta access the cream of the crop materials, that would have inhibited me getting involved in this craft in the first place. I never would have been able to do it. I wouldn't have been able to get involved in it because I wouldn't have been able to afford it. So no, you don't need quilt shop quality fabric. And if you want to use a sheet for your backing because that's what you want to use and that's what you have access to, then use a sheet for your backing. It's nobody's business. It's your quilt. You know, if you want to use used clothing, use used clothing. That is your business. That is your quilt. It is no one else's business. You know, people that say, you know, oh, you can't throw away your scraps. Yes, I can. Yes, I can. I try not to. I haven't. I mean, some small ones, but for the most part, I try to put my scraps into my backing and make a pieced back. And I've done scrap giveaways where I've given away my scraps to you guys. I haven't done a giveaway in a long time. But I've given away my scraps. I don't have to use I don't like scrap quilts. So I don't have to use scraps if I don't want to use scraps. And if I don't have any place to keep them and I don't have anyone to give them to, I can throw them away if I want to, and that's okay. Thread snobs. People, you gotta use Aurifil. No, you don't. Use what you have. Use what works for you. Is there something to be said for using cotton thread with cotton fabric so that they stretch the same or so the fabrics behave the same? I don't know. I don't know what thread I used for the very first quilt that I made, but I got it from Walmart. It was Coates and Clark, and I feel like it was polyester. And that quilt is still in my grandmother's house today. And I made that quilt in 99, 2000. So it's a 25-year-old quilt that I used cotton fabric from Walmart and polyester thread from Walmart, and it's still hanging in there, no problem. Just do what you want. Do what works for you. You know, if I had listened to the sewing machine snobs, I'd never got out. That's another barrier to entry, right? The sewing machine snobs. Bernina this and Pfaff that. Well, I couldn't afford a Bernina or a Pfaff. So I got a brother from Walmart for like $75. And without that, and I loved that little machine. I loved it so much that even after I upgraded, when I started going to classes, I went and got another one because I had sold that machine when I upgraded. And so when I was going to classes and I didn't want to bring my heavy sewing machine and be transporting it, I went and got me another one for classes. I paid $100 for it. Great little machine. Brother CS 6000. I recommend it to anyone that wants to start quilting and doesn't know what machine to get. Brother CS 6000i. Great little machine. So those are the things that I hate about quilting. But I don't like to end on a negative note. I like to be positive on this channel as much as I can. I believe that being positive helps your brain. I believe that once you start to allow a bunch of negativity, it can start to fester. And I think that's one of the issues that we have in this country is that we engage in so much negative media and negative social media that it starts to rot our brains. And so I try to infuse some positivity. So some things that I used to hate, pressing open. I used to hate pressing open. And even today, it's not my favorite thing to do, but I don't mind it anymore. I don't mind it. I don't mind it anymore. I think if you just do one quilt or just do one block, if you're making a quilt, have one block that you press open. It is nicer. It is flatter. I don't like it enough to press all my seams open. I don't do that, but I don't mind pressing my seams open. If I'm putting a quilt together and I'm noticing there are a lot of seams that come together, I know that when I go to quilt that quilt on my machine, that my needle's going to get stuck in those seams, and that's going to be a pain. And so I'd rather press a couple of seams open than have to deal with that wad of seams that my needle is going to struggle getting through. And then I've had needles break that way, where I'm trying to move the quilt top under the needle for my free motion just to have that needle get stuck. And I break the needle or I just break my flow, you know? So I don't mind pressing open anymore. If I see a need, I'll press open. I've got my little techniques. I know how I like to do it. I don't mind pressing open. And another thing that I don't mind anymore is gifting quilts. I used to try to keep everything I made because I didn't want to give it away, and then people do stuff with it, But after you get to making quite a few of these, at some point you get to a point where it's like, I can't keep all of these. So you got to make a choice. If you're going to keep all your quilts, or at some point you're going to have to start giving them away or donating them. Now, when you donate them, you'll never see it again, likely, right? You're not likely to ever see it again. So you don't know who got it or what they're doing with it. If you give it away to somebody you might see it again in the future, and you might not like what's going on with it. But for me, I don't care. Because the fact is, it's either going to sit in a bin or a closet in my house, or I'm going to give it to someone who's going to put it in a closet in their house, or I'm going to give it to someone who's going to end up using it. And, if I see my quilt being used as a dog bed, what's the alternative? To see it in my closet for 30 years? Dogs need love too. I'd rather my quilt being used by a dog and loved by a dog than it to sit on a shelf or a closet or in a bin for 20 years. Use the quilt. The only time I have an issue, or the only time I would have an issue, is if someone asked me to make them a quilt. And I've only made a quilt by request twice. But not technically three. The first time was my daughter. Actually, I think, no, technically the first time, it might have been Adrian who asked me to make, he wanted a red and black quilt because he's an Atlanta Falcon fan. I made him a red and black quilt. He never uses it. Sometimes people see you making something and their gut instinct is, oh, that's neat. Can you make me one? Without really thinking of how many hours it's going to take you to make that, and if they're actually going to appreciate that, right? Because you look at it this way. For me to make a quilt, it's going to take me a minimum of 40 hours, right? That's a full work week. How much time do you want to devote to making something for another person? right? Because if I'm making something that's just what I wanted to make, a quilt that I wanted to make because I like the fabric and I like the pattern and I just chose to make this quilt, that is my time for me to make something that I want with the fabrics that I want using a pattern that I want. When I make something for someone else, I'm using the fabric they want and the pattern that they want, right? So there's that. So it's not really about my enjoyment anymore when I'm not using the fabric that I want or making the pattern that I want. Now, fortunately for me, the two quilts that I made for someone in my house, one for Adrian and one for my daughter, they were both made from fabrics that I chose out of my stash, right? Well, one of my daughter chose the fabric out of my stash, but it was fabric that I chose, that I liked. So I didn't, at least I liked the fabric. She chose the pattern, but it was a pattern that I had in my stash that I liked. So I didn't mind making that quilt because it was fabric that I wanted to use and it was a pattern I wanted to make. I didn't mind that. So even though she used the quilt for a couple years and then kind of lost interest, I didn't mind making it. And then at the end of the day, that quilt is still in my house. I still have that. Quilt I made for Adrian, same thing. It was fabric that I purchased that was in my stash, and it was a quilt pattern that I wanted to make. So I didn't mind making it. And again, even though he never uses it, that quilt is still in my house. I own it. The only one that I actually gifted to someone outside of my house was someone asked me to make a quilt, not for her, but for someone else. But still, I got to use the fabric that I wanted. She had a specific color palette that she wanted, but I still got to choose those colors from my stash, my fabrics I chose. And I got to use a pattern that I liked, that I chose. So even though that quilt is outside of my house and I don't know what's happening to it, I still don't feel like I wasted my time making it because I still got to use my fabric in a pattern that I wanted and that I had been wanting to make. But if someone asked me to make a quilt for them using their fabric and a pattern they wanted to make, it's probably going to be a hard no for me, unless, like I said, like they're paying me top dollar, because I feel like if they're paying for it, they're going to appreciate it. Whereas if someone just like, hey, here's some fabric, here's a pattern, can you make this quilt for me? I'll give you a couple $100. I'm probably going to say no, because it's not going to be worth it to me unless I know for a fact that that person is going to take care of the quilt and enjoy it. And so I don't have to worry about any of that, I just make my own quilts using my fabric, using my patterns, and then I choose to gift them. And then if that gift ends up on someone's floor, if it ends up being in the trunk of someone's car, so, they put their car oil on it so it doesn't get on their car, it gets on my quilt, so be it. So be it. Live and let God. At least it's getting used. So this video ended up being a little bit longer than I anticipated it being, but those are the things that I hate about quilting, and then a couple of things that I used to hate that I actually don't mind anymore. So let me know in the comments what you guys hate or what you used to hate that now you don't mind so much. But that is it for me, and I'll see you guys next video.